While editing this episode, Dylan realized he began to say Christian Bale's name rather than Christian Slater, who is in fact in this film. He's well aware that the Caped Crusader was not on mission in this film to stop John Travolta from acquiring nuclear weapons. Now, allow him to wallow in disappointment for his error while you enjoy this episode of Rewatch or Return. All right, welcome to Rewatch or Return, the podcast where we put movies through the ultimate test across 10 universal categories to decide, does it call for a definite rewatch, a definite trip to the return bin, or does our subjectivity cause it to fall somewhere in between? This week, we're going to look at Broken Arrow. Why did I pick Broken Arrow? Just because it was a random film I watched this week, and I thought, hey, why not go ahead and hit that one? So, we're going to look at Broken Arrow. There's not a lot for me to say. This may be a shorter episode, or it may not. I don't know. We're going to move right into Fast Forward Facts, a quick narrative rundown of the history and facts behind the film. Time to cue the slow motion explosions and doves, because Broken Arrow was peak 1990s action cinema, complete with nuclear warheads, desert chases, and a whole lot of John Woo-style swagger. Released in February 1996, Broken Arrow was directed by legendary Hong Kong action auteur John Woo, who had just made his Hollywood debut with Hard Target. This was his second American film, and his signature style was starting to land. The story centers around a stolen nuke, or as the military calls it, a broken arrow. John Travolta stars as Major Vic Deke Deakins, a rogue U.S. Air Force pilot who hijacks a B-3 stealth bomber and attempts to ransom the U.S. government with 2 nuclear warheads. Travolta plays it delightfully unhinged, clearly relishing in the villain role just a year after his Pulp Fiction comeback. Christian Slater co-stars as Captain Riley Hale, Deakins' former wingman and the film's reluctant hero. He's cocky, resourceful, and just grounded enough to balance out Travolta's theatrical villainy. Samantha Mathis plays Park Ranger Terry Carmichael, who gets caught up in the chase and becomes a surprisingly capable partner in stopping the nuclear threat. The film was written by Graham Yost, who also wrote Keanu Reeves' 1994 Speed, and you can feel that same high-concept, tight time-frame tension running through Broken Arrow. There's even a train fight, a helicopter chase, and a desert canyon showdown, basically all the good stuff that you want in a 90s action flick. Behind the scenes, the action was mostly filmed in Utah's deserts and canyons with real military vehicles and large-scale pyrotechnics. The production worked closely with the U.S. military, but not without controversy. Some scenes, including nuclear weapon handling, were exaggerated or entirely fictional, drawing pushback from real defense experts. And let's talk about that soundtrack. The score by Hans Zimmer includes the now iconic guitar-heavy theme used again later in Scream 2 for Dewey's scenes. It's bold, twangy, and perfectly matches the stylized slow-motion shootouts. The film was rated R, clocked in at just under 2 hours, and opened to mixed reviews but strong box office. With a budget of $50 million, it pulled in over $150 million worldwide, proving that even in the post-Die Hard landscape, audiences still had a soft spot for big explosions and even bigger egos. And one final boom-worthy fact, Broken Arrow helped solidify Travolta's late 90s action streak, leading directly to his next collaboration with John Woo, Face Off, in 1997, which pushed everything Broken Arrow started into overdrive. So whether you're here for the nuclear drama, the desert showdowns, or just Travolta chewing scenery like it's his last meal, Broken Arrow is a wild, explosive ride that could have only happened in the 90s. All right, with that down, let's move right on into what the critics said. This is where we look at the first top 10 critic reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. However, there weren't even 10 top critics that gave me a written review on here. So there's only so many written ones, and some that just give you the basic, tomato or I guess intact tomato or not. But the tomato meter on here is 53%, just kind of barely over the halfway point for your critics, and not even that for the audience, a 44% on there. Right into what Jonathan Rosenbaum from the Chicago Reader said. Broken Arrow is beautifully crafted, mindless entertainment, nothing more, but nothing less. Robin Holabard from KUNR, Reno, Nevada, says the movie Broken Arrow remains rentable while the region's monolithic cliffs still overwhelm the senses. Mike Massey from Gone with the Twins, I'm assuming maybe that's in Minnesota or something. That makes sense. He says, despite a lot of mayhem taking place on the screen, the only memorable component of this ramshackle actioner is Hans Zimmer's score. Dennis Schwartz from Movie Reviews says, an inane thriller for those with a penchant for films that nuke themselves on purpose. Nick Rogers from Midwest Film Journal says, everything in the Wouvre is here, and John Travolta acts like a high school junior getting to play bad for the first time. That kind of makes me laugh there. That's not a knock. For better or worse, Broken Arrow embodies everything we expected of an American action movie in 1996. Owen Gleiberman from Entertainment Weekly just gives you the splat. He didn't give any written critique. Negative splat, that is. Rob Gonsalves, maybe, from Rob's Movie Vault, says, an intricate, rather beautiful dance of momentum and force. Greg Mackey from Star Democrat gives us the negative splat as well. Michael DeKina from themoviereport.com says, a perfectly entertaining, exciting, and competently made action thriller, but it can't help but be somewhat of a letdown. And then Jake Euchre from F5 in Wichita, Kansas, just gives the intact, better than average, I suppose, tomato that didn't splat. But that is what the critics said and what it looks like on Rotten Tomatoes. Moving on into first time or 50th. For me, I've seen this movie several times, and I don't really know why. This one and Face Off both have like a... Okay, so there's like some movies that it's just like the year that they came out, something about a particular time in your childhood or whatever. Like that movie was for some reason a movie that played a lot in your house or played a lot on television or for whatever reason. Like there's a period for me, particularly in the 90s, but where there's a handful of movies that just, because of who was in them and for whatever reason got played a lot, they were owned, or I'm pretty sure this one was on VHS at the house, and I just watched it a lot. I don't know how many times I've seen it over the years. I couldn't tell you a number, but that definitely influenced how I viewed the movie. The fact that I had seen it so many times growing up, for whatever reason. We'll get into how I actually feel about the movie from a technical perspective as we go through the categories after a while. But I will say, for whatever reason, I do have a bit of a soft spot for this film. It's a film that I can watch over and over again. Don't ask me why, because clearly there's a lot of negativity surrounding this film, and it doesn't have necessarily the greatest ratings. But for whatever reason, it's one of those films that I can watch a whole bunch, and I've seen this more times than I could count or tell you, to be honest with you. But that's my first time or 50th spiel for you. Moving into to be continued, would a sequel work for this film? And if there's a sequel, should there have been? So here's the deal. There's no sequel to this film. However, I think to myself, kind of like Speed, the movie Speed, where you could take a similar premise and they drug a couple of the original cast from the first Speed movie into Speed 2 and gave you a story that was fitting enough to call it Speed 2, I guess. I think you could do that with this. You could say Broken Arrow 2, you could say, okay, you don't even have to bring the same cast back, but we're going to have another situation where someone's stolen nuclear warheads and they're trying to sell them back, or they're trying to get them back, or whatever. A misplaced or missing nuclear warhead known as Broken Arrow, or a Broken Arrow. You could have another storyline that could be, sorry, there's fuzz floating in the air here. You could have another storyline where it's either you bring back, obviously you don't bring back John Travolta because he's dead, but you wouldn't want to bring back your villain like that. But you could bring back Christian Slater. They could have, you wouldn't now, but you could have brought back Christian Slater and put him in another position, another situation, where you don't even have to call it Broken Arrow. You could have a sequel. Again, you could take U.S. Marshals, for example. You have The Fugitive, right? And it's called The Fugitive. And then the sequel to The Fugitive is called U.S. Marshals. So you could do something, you could go two directions here with a sequel, right? You could say, we're going to develop a sequel that is the same premise, as in it's Broken Arrow 2, and it could be about anybody. It just has to be about a missing nuclear warhead. Or you could go another route and say, I'm going to put Christian Slater's character in another, situation where he has to do similar things and be the hero, but we're going to call it something different, to where essentially the sequel is not a sequel carrying on the story of a missing warhead, and it's not necessarily Broken Arrow, but we're going to make it a sequel to this character rather than a sequel to the premise of the film, right? So we're going to have a character sequel and call it something else, where similarly, while they were after A Fugitive, you have a character sequel essentially in Tommy Lee Jones and all the guys that were part of the U.S. Marshal stuff that went into the U.S. Marshal movie, but they were all in The Fugitive. But no longer did you have Harrison Ford. This was a different situation, a different chase. It's called U.S. Marshals. You get what I'm saying? You could go two routes with it. Either same premise, Broken Arrow 2, or you could go different premise, same character, continue that character story, put them in another situation, and just have a sequel called something else. It's been done before. Could have gone either way. I'd probably watched it. I would have watched a Broken Arrow 2, I'm sure. Just like I watched Under Siege 2, and just like I watched U.S. Marshals, and just like at the time, I liked this movie personally enough, I would have watched the sequel to see what it was. Whether it had been a no continuation of characters, but continuation of premise, or no continuation of premise, but continuation of characters. Either way. With that down, before we jump into the final segment, today's episode is brought to you by PrepStartsNow.com, your go-to spot for emergency and outdoor preparedness. If you're anything like me, you'd rather be prepared and not need it than need the essentials and not have them. From 72-hour emergency essentials to camping gear, car emergency essentials, multi-tools, first aid, and even home gardening supplies as you start to grow some of your own food, they've got you covered for all of it. And the best part is, as a listener, you can use the promo code REWATCH to get 15% site-wide discount, and you'll also be helping out the show as they give us a small reward for your business in the process. Head to PrepStartsNow.com/discount/rewatch. That's PrepStartsNow.com/discount/rewatch, or simply enter the code REWATCH at checkout and get prepared today. All right. We're going to do a quick recap before the final verdict. I'm going to keep it very, 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 very basic. Basically, what you have here is two pilots, Christian Bale, John Travolta. They are each other's wingman, kind of bit of rivals. John Travolta on a mission with a B-3 bomber that is carrying 2 nuclear warheads, turns on Christian Bale's character, sets him up, ejects him from the plane in the middle of a fight in the cockpit, drops 2 nuclear warheads out of the plane onto the desert floor, crashes the plane, and then there's this big entourage that has been previously set up with John Travolta's character. They pick up the nuclear warheads, or they're going to find the nuclear warheads, essentially. And then you have Christian Bale's character, who is now stranded in the middle of the desert, runs into a park ranger, who, after a little scuttle, they end up on the same team, and both of their goal is to stop John Travolta, and John Travolta's goal is to sell these warheads back to the U.S. because they need to get them out of, it's basically like, hey, I've got your warheads, and if you want them back, you got to give me all this money kind of thing. So he's planned all this out. So the whole entire movie is basically they're in the desert, and John Travolta is trying to do his thing, and Christian Bale is trying to stop him. They go through the whole film where Christian Bale is successful at times in slowing John Travolta down, but ultimately doesn't stop him from doing what he wants to do. By the end of the movie, the nuclear warheads are on a train headed to the city, and Christian Bale's character ends up back on the train with help from the U.S. military, and little by little, one thing after another, he stops John Travolta, who has a nuclear warhead, on the train. He causes the train to crash. He jumps off before it crashes, him and the park ranger lady, and the nuclear warhead. It's kind of like if someone slams on the brakes in a car, you're going to shoot forward. That's basically what happens here. The train car hits the rest of the train in front of it, and it causes the nuclear warhead to not blow up, but just kind of like be shot into with whatever you want to call it, momentum, be shot into John Travolta's character and ultimately knock him into the next car, and then there's a big explosion. It's not a nuclear explosion, but I think it's like a helicopter explosion that was on the train, something along those lines. Basically, he dies. So that's what the whole movie is. You've got a plan to steal nuclear warheads. You've got one of the guys that turns bad, one of the good, and then you've got the good guy who's trying to stop him. And it's a battle throughout the whole film to try to recover the warheads, try to stop the guy who has the warheads, and at the end, the good guy stops the bad guy. Maybe a terrible rundown for you and a terrible recap for you, but there's not a lot of recapping to do when it comes to detail other than that. So let's jump right into the final verdict, where we put the film to the test across 10 categories, scored on a scale from 1 to 5. And that scale looks like this: 5 is excellent, 4 is good, 3 is fair, 2 is weak, and 1 is poor. The verdict scale from 10 to 20, when this is all said and done, and these are all added up, a score from 10 to 20 is a return, definite. A score from 20 to 30 is return worthy, unless you're feeling a little bit nostalgic, maybe it's debatable. A score from 30 to 40 is a leans rewatch, but it's the same way. Maybe it's a little bit debatable. Some people might want it lower. And then a score from 40 to 50 is certified rewatchable. Now let's jump right into story and plot. Is the narrative compelling and coherent? Does it still hold up on a rewatch? So here's how I feel about the story and plot. I think that my issue with this film is I like the story in that I like the premise of the film. What I don't like is the fact that too much stuff just happens because it happens and happens to be convenient. It's kind of like everything, oh, that's so cool that that's perfectly set up for him. That's so cool that that's perfectly set up. That's so cool that that's perfectly set up. How in the world? There's a part in the thing where Christian Bale's character is going to put in the wrong code too many times for the nuclear warhead to where it shuts off and doesn't allow it, like it just completely disables it and no longer can it be used. So he's doing that, and he's like putting it in, and he puts it in so many times, and then instead of deactivating it or disabling it, it actually starts the timer, like a 30-minute timer or something like that, on this nuclear warhead. And John Travolta's character's like, yeah, I used some kind of circuit board or something on the nuclear warhead where it would do that. And I'm thinking, when would you, as a pilot, have access to the inner workings of the nuclear bomb? It doesn't make a lot of sense. When did you have access to this? Also, what I kind of don't understand from the get-go of this film is they're brought in, and maybe I misunderstood this or just wasn't paying close enough attention, but it seems they were brought in to their higher-ups' office to be told about this mission that they're going on. How did he prepare everything for what happened with such little, such short notice? Maybe I'm wrong, or maybe there was supposed to be a time gap in between this, or maybe I completely missed that they already knew about this. anyway, there's just a whole lot of stuff where I feel like I said, I like the premise of the film. I don't like that the proper either setup or exposition wasn't added to the film to where you feel like that that totally makes sense. Like, I can see that that's an explanation as to why he was able to do this, or he was able to do this, or he was able to do this. But instead, what you have in this film is everything's perfectly planned out. So like that's how you're supposed to accept it all, as like, don't worry, I've got all this planned out. That's the extent of the information that you get, that you're supposed to take and go, okay, all this makes sense to me because he's got it perfectly planned out. Which I want more than that from my film. So for story and plot, I'm scoring this a 3 out of 5. It's just a fair right in the middle. I think it could have been much better had it been written better, but I like the overall premise of the story. I just don't like the fact that I think it's wanting in many ways. So I'm just giving it a 3, putting it in the middle. It's just adequate, right? Moving along to characters and performances. Are the characters memorable and well acted, or forgettable and flat? Here's another one where like I don't think there's any like amazing acting in this film. Like the guy said in the review, it feels like John Travolta feels like a high school kid who's getting to play a villain for the first time. It really does feel that way. I watched this and like I'm not saying John Travolta is not a good actor. I like him in so many things, but like his character in this movie, it's almost just like too much, over the top, too much. Like it's like he's overacting a little bit, I guess, at times, and that I don't necessarily enjoy as much. I think like he's a much better actor for what, and this may have been direction from the director to be a certain way, you know what I mean? Doesn't necessarily fall on Travolta, because I've seen him, he plays a really good bad guy. This felt like a cheesy bad guy. It's very, very fitting for, you know, kind of 80s, 90s action film, but still kind of whatever. Christian Bale's character, there's nothing, again, nobody does a bad job. It's just nothing sticks out, right? I will say that the girl who plays the park ranger, she's, I don't want to talk bad about anybody. I don't know that she's necessarily that just great of an actor in general. But again, it's like nothing great, but nothing terrible. So I'm going to score the characters and performances at a 3 out of 5 because it's, again, fair. It's adequate. Nothing special. Moving right along to pacing and entertainment value. Were you entertained the whole time? Did the movie keep your attention? Does it feel too slow, too rushed, or just right? I mean, I think it's pretty solid. I think it leans toward good. Like, I have no problem giving this from a pacing and entertainment value. I have no problem giving it a 4 out of 5. I think that's manageable, reasonable, doable. So I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 and say it's good. There's not any point where I felt like it's too slow. There's not any point where I felt like they're rushing anything. It does keep my attention when I watch it. And it's entertaining. That's the thing. Like, this is an entertaining film. It's just not necessarily a great film, if that makes any sense at all to you. All right, dialogue and quotability. Are there iconic or memorable lines? Do people still quote it? Does the dialogue feel natural or cringy? Are there iconic or memorable lines? Not really. Do people still quote it? No. Does the dialogue feel natural or cringy? At times it feels cringy. At times it's mostly natural, but at times there's some cringy. There's some cringe in it. I'm just gonna put it again. I'm just gonna put it at fair. Like it's just kind of. I think we're gonna see, from me anyway, in this film, you're just gonna see this is kind of going to be pretty fair across the board, I suppose. There's nothing real great, but there's nothing real terrible about the dialogue. It's not a super quotable movie, although to me, there's a lot of stuff that sticks in my head, but I don't think, like, in general, this is not a film where people go like, yeah, that real popular, common, iconic line or anything like that. Anyway, I'm going to put dialogue and quotability at 3 and just say it's fair, adequate. Moving on to soundtrack and score. Does the music enhance the film or date it? Does it elevate the emotional tone of the film or feel out of place? Is it iconic or generic? The only really, I would say, like, overall, there's nothing super special about the score to this film, but the slow, almost like maybe baritone, electric guitar stuff is really fitting and, like, is one of my favorite parts about this movie. It's the same. So what I found out is the guitar part is like boom, 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 boom. I'm probably a little off pitch there, but they took that from this film apparently, or this was pre Scream 2, which was probably, 98-ish, 98, 99, maybe even 2000, I'm not sure, but probably 98-ish if the original was in 96. So that music, that theme was put as a placeholder in Scream 2 for when Dewey was on scene. It was kind of like Dewey's theme. And it went so well in the audience reviews or, pre-screenings that they just left it in the film. So the theme that you hear here in this film, that guitar thing that's like really catchy and really memorable, that was in Scream 2 is in Scream 2 because they just used it as a placeholder, kind of like, oh, we're going to put something sort of like this here, but we've got to get there and get that done. They just ended up leaving it there. So there's that. It's a very memorable and familiar thing because it's in both films. But to me, that theme is so memorable and so catchy and so, like, I know it when I hear it kind of deal, that even though the overall score to this film is nothing special, it's not bad, but it's nothing special, I think that theme alone elevates it. So I put the soundtrack and score at 3.9 out of 5 because I think that while it's just a fair, kind of adequate score to the film, that theme alone elevates it. I'm not going to put it all the way up at the good mark at a 4, but I'm putting it at 3.9 because I think that it's because it's my score. How about that? Moving along to cinematography and visual style. Is it visually engaging or stylish, regardless of effects budget or genre? Do the camera work and effects still impress, or do they look dated or clunky? Well, this is very much a John Woo film. I can't help but watch this film. We'll get into this a little more later, but, like, I'm not a huge John Woo film guy, but the John Woo films that I like, kind of, like, I have a special place for, if that makes any sense. It's like, there's a handful that I like, and I really like those movies. The rest of them I could care less about. But he's definitely very unique. Like, you can watch something and go, this is a John Woo film. The doves that are always in the stuff, the slow motion that he likes to use, the way that he does gunfights, the way that he does hand-to-hand combat, the close-ups and the the circular pans and the different things. Very much John Woo. Very, I'm sure, taken from other things. Obviously, he's been influenced by other people. But to me, there's a very original thing to John Woo and his style. So it's very stylish, very sometimes to a fault, but it is very stylish. I don't think the effects in this are bad. They do a good job with practicality, with building practical sets. The only thing I would say is like some of the practical shots, plane crashing, explosion, particularly the B3 when it explodes. You can clearly tell it's a miniature. You can clearly tell it's a miniature on wires. You can clearly tell it's a controlled explosion to be shot that way. That's totally fine. I get it. But the lighting on that, I feel like that's one of the biggest problems with when people do that stuff, when it's like, okay, we're going to practically shoot a miniature explosion or a thing with miniature. If you don't do the lighting right, it just makes it look like you shot a minute. Like, it just looks like what it is. If you properly light it, it makes it look like what you want it to look like. I don't think it was very well lit. I think it was too lit. The fact that this is a B-3 bomber crashing at nighttime, if you're showing me that, I don't need to see every detail because I wouldn't be able to see that shot at night anyway. It was so detailed, it was like over the top, and kind of took me out of it. Even though it was a real explosion, it still took me out of it because I could very clearly tell, like, this is a miniature. So, let's see here. Camera work and effects, still pressed. They look dated. I don't think they're dated necessarily or clunky. They're just very, again, this is just very John Woo. From a cinematography and visual style, I gave this a 3.8 out of 5. It's almost good, but I think there's some things that are lacking, and which is kind of typical of like that time period John Woo stuff. It's just how I feel about it. Anyway, cinematography and visual style, 3.8 out of 5. Moving on to originality and creativity. Does the film feel fresh and inspired, or like something you've seen 100 times? Was the film groundbreaking or formulaic? Does it bring something unique? Fresh and inspired? No, it just feels like a John Woo movie. It feels like a John Woo movie, not like something I've seen 100 times, because a John Woo movie doesn't feel like something I've seen 100 times. It feels like a John Woo movie I've seen 100 times, if that makes sense. I don't think it was groundbreaking. I don't necessarily think it was formulaic either. I don't know that it brings anything unique. Originality and creativity, I'm going to give a 2.5. I'm changing this in real time. 2.5. It's between weak and fair, right? That's how I feel about it. And I'm okay with that. Originality and creativity, 2.5 out of 5. All right, theme and message. Is there a deeper takeaway, and does it explore ideas that resonate today? There's nothing for me to get into with the theme and message here. If you want to say anything from a theme and message perspective, you could say, hey, it shows that doing something wrong for gain isn't right. Maybe it's a commentary on that, maybe. Doing something wrong for gain is not right, and it's worth stepping up and trying to. I'm not getting into it because I'm just trying to cook something up here to say something about theme and message, when in reality there's not really any theme and message here. This is just a 90s action film, and so I'm going to just say like 2 out of 5 for theme and message. I'll put it there. 2 out of 5. Cringe factor. Any jokes, effects, or moments that haven't aged well or were always bad. Moments that make you wince now that are campy, cheesy, bad effects, outdated jokes that aren't funny, etc. There's some cringe about this film. It's 90s. It's a 90s action film, right? I don't think there's necessarily any jokes that are cringy. Some of the effects, like I've already spoke to that, are a little cringy in the way that they were lit. It's like, you can do something about that. You can fix that. You should have an eye for that. It's not that hard to do. Moments that haven't aged well, I don't think so. That were always bad, make you wince now. No, it does have some, camp and cheese about it. Is that, like particularly with Travolta's acting. From a cringe factor perspective, I'm just going to put it in the middle, 3 out of 5. It's not, I think, like, it's not necessarily, I wouldn't put it above the halfway point when it comes to no cringe, but I wouldn't put it below the halfway point when it comes to being very cringe. So I'm just going to say it's right there in the middle, again, at fair, when it comes to cringe. It's not really leaning heavy one way or the other. Moving on into nostalgia and rewatchability. Does it hold up to your memory of it? It is, yeah. It's kind of the movie that I always thought it was. Does it still matter today? Not really. It's just a good old fun, grab your popcorn, 1990s action flick. Is it timeless? No. Has it aged poorly? I don't think so. Does a rewatch ruin the magic? Not for me. Would you honestly watch it again? Yeah, I own the movie. I'll watch it again. I watch this movie. This is one of my guilty pleasure, throw it on occasionally films. If it's on TV, I'm going to watch it. I don't know what else to tell you. So, from a nostalgia and rewatchability perspective, I'm putting it again right there in the middle for me. This is a personal thing. Right there in the middle at 3 out of 5. It's just kind of fair. It's a movie that I like, but it's not like... Is it weird to say this is a movie that I like, but it's not one of my favorite movies? It's a movie I really enjoy, but it's not one of my favorite movies. I wouldn't put it on a list of favorite movies. If you gave me... It's not one that comes to mind at all on a list of favorite movies. However, it's one where if it's on, I want to watch it. That's really weird to say, isn't it? It's kind of odd. Anyway, nostalgia and rewatchability I put at a 3 out of 5. And before we do the tally here and give you the verdict score or final verdict score or whatever, I thought, okay, usually we do I've done up to this point, anytime I've done a bonus category, it's had something to do with theme park stuff. We're not going to do that this time. I thought this bonus category for this that has no bearing on anything could be how John Woo is this John Woo film. From the perspective of all of John Woo's stuff, how John Woo is this one. I'm not going to put it on a scale. I'm just going to tell you the things that are very... So, I can't say I've seen every John Woo movie. I can tell you the John Woo movies that are my... If I'm going to watch a John Woo movie, it's going to be one of these movies that I'm fixing to tell you. It's going to be, to start as a big Mission Impossible fan, it's going to be Mission Impossible 2. That would be the first John Woo movie that I would pick to watch, I think. So you've got Mission Impossible 2. You've got Broken Arrow, this film. You got Face Off. You have Wind Talkers with... Nicolas Cage. I think those would be... I'm probably missing something, but out of John Woo movies, those would be my go-to John Woo movies. Mission Impossible 2, Broken Arrow, Face Off, and Wind Talkers. Apart from that, I'm not necessarily a huge John Woo fan, so I'm I'm saying all this, how John Woo is this one, I'm going to kind of go out of those 4, right? I think Wind Talkers is the least John Woo, in my opinion, of all the John Woo films. Wind Talkers, I'm going to put out of my favorite Woo movies, the least John Woo. I would put this one, I would say Face Off is probably the most John Woo, or Face Off and Mission Impossible 2 may tie at 1, which would put, I think, like Broken Arrow at 2 and Wind Talkers at 3. But there is a clear and obvious thing that John Woo does. The problem that I have with John Woo films is he chooses to do things that visually take me out of stuff. And what I mean by that is like way too much wire work that is just like defies the laws of gravity. It's clear and obvious. Like when the dude on here, when Christian Bale swings through the thing and he kicks the, I think it's Howie Long. This is Howie Long's maybe first and only film. I could be wrong about that. I think this is Howie Long's first and only film. Anyway, not an actor, football player, played for the Raiders back in the 80s. I think this is Howie Long's first and only film, but he's on the train, and it's the part where he's basically like, hey, dude, I didn't come here to die. I didn't come here to die for you either. So at that point, he kind of turns on John Travolta's character, and then Christian Bale swings through and kicks him off the train, and he goes flying off into a river. But the way that his body moves is just very, like, does not match with what you know would happen from a gravitational perspective. It's the same in Mission Impossible 2 when Tom Cruise runs the motorcycle off the upper part of the bridge onto the lower bridge, and he like floats for way too long. That's not how gravity works, man. And it's like, you're not making this Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon type of film where like that sort of stuff is acceptable. You're making what's supposed to be at least grounded in the laws of physics or laws of whatever, not physics, you know what I mean? Just the laws of how things work. So it just doesn't, that stuff takes me out of films when I see it. And that's really one of John Woo's biggest problems, in my opinion. Some of the hand-to-hand combat stuff from a John Woo perspective is a little, the way he shoots it, like he's trying to shoot it sort of at the right angle from the right perspective to make it look more interesting, but like to me it's just like sort of lame a lot of times. There's some really good stuff, but then also like if you don't have the right people doing it and you're trying to make them look like they're doing something more interesting than they are, he fails sometimes in that perspective. Like the fight between what's her name, the girl, the park ranger, and Christian Bale. There's parts where I'm like, it's just there's some shin kicking and there's just some nonsense stuff that's like not believable, I guess. Anyway, just a fun little bonus category. How Woo is the Woo film. I would put this one out of two movies tying, two of my favorites tying at 1, and one of them being on the bottom. I'm putting this right in the middle there at 2. From how Woo is the Woo film. I'm not the biggest Woo fan, so sorry to all you huge John Woo fans out there. Moving into the scoring for the final verdict. All right, story and plot, I gave a 3 out of 5. Characters and performances, I gave a 3 out of 5. Pacing and entertainment value, I gave a 4 out of 5. Dialogue and quotability, 3 out of 5. Soundtrack and score, 3.9 out of 5. Cinematography and visual style, 3.8 out of 5. Originality and creativity, 2.5 out of 5. Theme and message, 2 out of 5. Cringe factor, 3 out of 5. And nostalgia and rewatchability, 3 out of 5. And that brings us to 31.2 out of 50. Meaning that this one falls barely into that leans rewatch but debatable category. Either way, though, it does fall between 30 and 40, meaning that this movie is a Leans rewatch. It just barely crossed the line there. Again, for me, this is a super rewatchable film. Always has been, but that's just because it's a guilty pleasure of mine. I would not qualify it as a great film or anything of that nature. It's just, again, a guilty pleasure that I like, and if it's on, I'm going to watch it. And sometimes just for fun, I put it on even if it's not on TV. I just want to watch it. It's one of those that I can throw on and not pay a whole lot of attention to, but it's still enjoy and kind of come back to it. You know, it's one of those kind of deals. Anyway, 31.2 out of 50. Leans Rewatch, Broken Arrow, 1996. Christian Bale, John Travolta, John Woo. Side note, the girl that plays the park ranger in this film is in a movie called The Thing Called Love that I really like. If you have never seen that, go check it out. Just a random shout out to that film and one of the films that she's in. All right. I think we are coming to an end here. Thank you guys for staying to the end. If you are watching on YouTube, thank you. If you want to comment below, tell me what you think about this film. I would love to have a conversation about it. If you are listening on the podcast audio form on one of the podcast platforms, then if you want to add me or add the podcast on Rewatch or Return on Instagram, you can have a conversation in the comment sections of the post related to this film. I'd love to have a chat there as well. I'm always down to talk movies and chit chat with anybody about how they feel about anything. And I love the fact that, again, art is subjective, movies are subjective. There are movies maybe I would say sometimes are objectively good, but again, not everybody has to like everything, and that's what makes it great. Until next time, see you next week.